ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। श्रीमद् भगवत गीता साधक संजीवनी थर्ड चैप्टर कर्म योगा verses 36 to 43. Inspiration to kill desire, the root of sins. Why does a man not perform his own duty when he knows that one's own duty is better, though devoid of merit, than the duty of another well discharged? At this, Arjuna puts the question in the verse that follows. Verse 36. Arjuna Uvacha अथाकेन प्रयुक्तोऽयं पापं चरति पुरुषः अनिच्छन् अपि वर्षणीय बलाद् इव नियोजितः. Arjuna said, but by what is a man impelled to commit sin, as if by force, even against his will? O Varshnya, Krishna. Comment. Lord Krishna has been addressed as Vrsni because he belonged to the Vrsni clan. The Lord in the 34th verse said, attachment and aversion, which are the subtle forms of desire and anger, are the foes of a striver. That is, they are the roots of sins. As it was said in a general way, Arjuna could not understand this point. So, he puts this question. Arjuna means to ask whether it is a lack of faith or carping spirit or villainous nature or clouded understanding or force of one's own nature or attachment and aversion or disinclination for one's own duty and inclination to the duty of another, which drives a man to commit sin. Besides them, is it God or fortune or time or circumstance or action or bad company or society or custom or any government law, etc., which is impelling him to commit sin? The Lord answers the question in the next verse, verse 37. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidyenam iha verinam. The blessed Lord said, it is desire, it is wrath, born of the mode of passion, all devouring and most sinful. Know this to be the enemy here. Comment. Craving for the perishable objects is called desire. Whatever we desire does not happen, and whatever we don't desire happens. This is suffering. Desire is the root of all sins and sufferings. A man with a desire can't get happiness even in dream. If desire is renounced, there is no question of any suffering. The need for God realization, which may appear to be like desire, is not really a desire. The reason is that the desire is never satisfied, but it is strengthened by sense enjoyments, while the need of God realization is fulfilled having realized God. In fact, the need of the self, soul, is to realize God, but he, the self, has a desire to acquire the perishable objects, etc., because his discrimination is veiled. A doubt may arise how the worldly affairs will go on without a desire. The clarification is that the worldly affairs go on with actions and commodities rather than with desires. Nothing in the world can be acquired by having a desire. It is the fruit of efforts. People have a desire to become rich, yet they remain poor. All the people, except the liberated souls, have a desire to live alive, but they die. As a man has to undergo unfavorable circumstances unwillingly, he will also undergo favorable circumstances. A man has to bear pain, blame, and dishonor, etc., without any desire. Similarly, he will gain pleasure, praise, and honor without desire as a result of his fate. It is out of desire that a man performs actions. When there is an excess of this desire, it forces him to perform forbidden actions. It is because of desire that he is more attached to the unreal. As soon as he renounces the desire, his affinity for the unreal is renounced. Some people hold that desires can't be totally renounced, but the fact is that desires can't be maintained. They appear and disappear. They have a beginning and an end. They are constantly decaying. If we don't have the new desire, the old desire, whether satisfied or not, disappears itself. Everyone's desires may not be satisfied forever, but they can be renounced forever because they are transitory. The difficulty in renouncing a desire is that we have the feeling of mind. If we become free from this feeling of mind, we shall become desireless. The desirelessness will lead to detachment. When we become free from the feeling of mind, desire, and attachment, we attain uniformity, desirelessness, and independence automatically. Desires are of four kinds. 1. Necessary. Necessities of life should be satisfied. There are four criteria for such a desire. 1. It is born at present, as desire for food when one is hungry. 2. The material to satisfy it is available at present. 3. It is impossible to live without satisfying it. 4. Its satisfaction does evil neither to him nor to others. Thus, the necessity should be satisfied. When the necessities are satisfied, a man gets strength to renounce desires. But he should not derive pleasure out of the satisfaction of even necessities, otherwise, it will be conducive to the birth of new desires which can never be satisfied. Second kind of desire is personal and just, but is beyond our power. Such a desire should be rooted out by offering it to God. There should not be injustice and exploitation in the world. A striver having offered such a desire to God becomes carefree. The Lord satisfies it if he thinks it proper. Third kind of desire is to satisfy the desire of others, which is just, which is for their welfare, and which is within our power to satisfy. Thus, by satisfying the desires of others, we get strength to renounce our desires. The other desires fall in the category of fourth kind of desires, which can be rooted out by reflection. An important and easy means to get rid of desire is to render service to others with the body, senses, mind, intellect, and life breath, etc., without any selfish motive. When a man knows that it is desire which compels him to commit sin, why does he commit sin? The Lord explains in the next two verses. Verse 38. धूमेन व्रियते वह्निर् यथादर्शो मलिन च यथोल्बेन वृतो गर्भस्तथा तेनेदम् आवृतम्. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror by dust, and as an embryo by the placenta, so is this knowledge covered by that desire. Comment. Discrimination is revealed in the intellect. There are three divisions of intellect: of the nature of goodness, of passion, and of ignorance. The intellect by which one knows what ought to be done and what ought not to be done is of the nature of goodness. The intellect by which one wrongly understands what ought to be done and what ought not to be done is of the nature of passion, while the intellect by which one sees all things in a perverted way, contrary to the truth, is of the nature of ignorance. As soon as a desire is born, the spiritual path is covered with its smoke. If it is given scope for enhancement, it makes the path totally dark. We have a desire to acquire the worldly objects because they appear to be beautiful and charming. The desire veils discrimination, which is a privilege of human birth. Just as fire can burn even when it is covered with smoke, so can discrimination work if a man becomes cautious as soon as desire is born. A man can get rid of the desire at the outset by thinking of the kaleidoscopic and transitory nature of the worldly objects, etc., which he wants to acquire. The less importance he will attach to the worldly objects, the more importance he will attach to God. When he stops attaching importance to the worldly objects altogether, he will realize God and desire will totally perish. If a desire is not satisfied, it gives birth to anger. From anger arises delusion. From delusion, there is destruction of discrimination. From destruction of discrimination, he does not do what ought to be done, but indulges in evil acts such as falsehood, fraud, dishonesty, injustice, oppression, and other sinful acts. An important fact: according to the scriptures, mala, sin, impurity, vikshepa, confusion, and avarna, veil, are said to be the three stumbling blocks to God realization. Out of these three, sin is regarded as the most deadly defect. Desire is the root of sin. When a striver resolves not to commit sin in future, the defects are rooted out and his sin begins to decay. But when he renounces the desire totally, all his sins perish. When a striver performs any action, whether it is mundane or spiritual, he should think, why do I perform it and how do I perform it? By thinking so, he will constantly have an eye on the aim of his life. Consequently, he will perform only virtuous actions, being free from attachment and the desire for fruit. This performance of actions without attachment and the desire for reward will lead him to salvation. Verse 39. Avritam jnanam etena jnanino nityaverina kamarupena kantya dushpurena anlena cha. O Arjuna, wisdom is enveloped by this constant enemy of the wise, discerning soul, in the form of desire which is insatiable like fire. Comment. As fire is never satiated when clarified butter is added to it, it rather grows stronger. So is desire never satisfied by enjoying the objects of desire. It is rather strengthened. The fire of desire devours everything which comes into its contact. A poor man is not so greedy as is a rich man. When a man earns 100 rupees, he has a desire to earn 1,000 rupees. It means that he feels that he needs 900 more. When he earns 1,000 rupees, he desires to have 10,000 rupees. It means that he needs 9,000 more. When he gains 10,000 rupees, he has a desire to gain a lakh of rupees. Thus, he needs 90,000 more. Thus, the richer he grows, the more greedy he becomes. On the other hand, a contented man, being free from all desires, is the king of kings. In fact, it is not wealth, but desire for wealth which is an obstacle to God realization. This desire deprives the rich and the poor equally of God realization. It can never be satiated. A man can get rid of it by renouncing it. The desire to derive pleasure out of the affinity for the insentient is called kama. This desire manifests itself in different forms, such as lust for gold, power, and of the flesh, craving for things, attachment to loving and charming objects, hope to acquire something, and greed to acquire more and more. When a man's desire is intensified, it is followed by solicitation. These are the different forms of desire. Desires involve dependence on the world and create importance of the world, which are stumbling blocks to the spiritual path. It pricks ignorant at the outset that it will result in adversity. The ignorant who are engrossed in sensual pleasures hold that desire is their friend because they derive pleasure out of the objects. Without desire, objects can't provide pleasure. But the fact is that the desire and the pleasures lead him to sorrows, sufferings, imprisonment, and hells, etc. Thus, desire is a constant enemy of the ignorant also, but they are not aware of it, while wise strivers are aware of it. An important fact: desire is the root of all sins and suffering. Once a man was looking for his wife. People asked him, "What is the name of your wife?" He replied, "Disgrace." They again asked, "What is your name?" He replied, "Wicked." People said, "Don't be agitated. She is a very chaste and faithful wife. She will come to you," because disgrace ever accompanies the wicked. Similarly, sufferings automatically accompany the man who hankers after the perishable pleasures. A man wants to avoid sufferings, but he does not renounce desire, which is the root of sufferings. In the Ramcharitmanas, it is declared, a man can't attain bliss even in dream so long as he does not renounce desire. The desire for enjoyment of worldly objects is never satiated. The more he enjoys them, the more the desire for them is strengthened. In order to satiate it, he is inclined to sinful acts. When he has desire for wealth, he wants to earn it by fair means or foul. Then at the second stage, the desire engages him in theft and robberies, while in the third stage, it leads him to commit violence and even murder. Thus, the desire for pleasures makes the life miserable here as well as hereafter. In order to slay an enemy, it is necessary to know where it resides. Therefore, the Lord in the next verse mentions the seeds of desire, the constant enemy of the wise, discerning soul. Verse 40. इंद्रियाणि मनोबुद्धिर अस्याधिष्ठानम् उच्यते एतैर्विमोहत्ये एषा ज्ञानम् आवृत्य देहिनम्. The senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seat. Veiling wisdom by these senses, mind, and intellect, it deludes the embodied soul. Comment. Desire is said to have five abodes: objects, senses, mind, intellect, assumed ego, I, namely doer. Though it seems to reside in five abodes, yet in fact it resides in the assumed ego. A man has a desire to enjoy the sense objects, sensual pleasures. Firstly, he does not get those desired sense objects. However, if he gets them, they don't stay. In spite of it, he desires to get them somehow or the other and thinks of so many devices to obtain them. Therefore, first the desire attracts the senses towards objects. Then the senses attract the mind, while the senses and the mind attract the intellect. Thus, desire, veiling wisdom through the senses, mind, and intellect, deludes the embodied soul and drives it to ruin. Desire deludes only the embodied soul, that is, the soul which has identified itself with the body and has accepted the relationship of mind with it. The Lord, at the beginning of His Gospel, explained that the soul is different from the body. This is also everyone's experience. The desire, veiling wisdom, deludes the embodied soul, the soul which accepts its affinity for the body, not the pure soul. A man, the soul, assuming the body as I, mine, and for me, attaches importance to the perishable objects and gets attached to them. This attachment creates affinity for them. This affinity gives birth to desire. The desire, having deluded the man embodied soul, leads him to the worldly bondage. The Lord in the next verse tells Arjuna the device of slaying this enemy, that is, desire, and orders him to kill it. Verse 41. Tasmat tvam indriyanayetau niyamya bhartarishbha papmanam prajahi hyanam jnana vijnana nashnam. Therefore, O best of Bhartas, Arjuna, controlling the senses first, slay this sinful destroyer of wisdom and realization. Comment. The senses should neither have an aversion to disagreeable action nor an attachment to agreeable action. Actions performed with attachment and aversion strengthen attachment and aversion, and they drive a man to ruin. Therefore, let the scripture be the authority for determining what should be done and what should not be done. A man wants to lead the lonely life of an ascetic by renouncing the household affairs, but he does not renounce desire. He does not even think to renounce it. If desires are renounced, everything will be set right automatically. When a man dies with unfulfilled desires, they lead him to the next birth. It means that desires lead him to the bondage of birth and death. Thus, desires do nothing except binding him. When a man is attracted towards the worldly objects, desire is born. This desire veils discrimination and he indulges in sense pleasure. The pleasure of birds and beasts is confined to the pleasure born of the contact of senses with objects. But a man desires objects and money and also indulges in hoarding money. In order to hoard money, he adopts foul means such as falsehood, fraud, thefts, and robberies, etc. Moreover, he becomes proud of himself. This pride is a demoniac trait. So the Lord orders Arjuna to slay the sinful desire. Verses 42 and 43. Indriyani prani ahar indriye bhayaha param manha mansastu para buddhirya buddheha parat satu saha evam buddheha param buddhva संस्थाभे आत्मानाम आत्मना जाहि शत्रु महाबाहो Kama Rupam Durasadam. They say that the senses are greater than the gross body. Greater than the senses is the mind. Greater than the mind is the intellect. But greater than the intellect is the desire. Thus, knowing that desire is beyond intellect, subduing the self by the self, slay thou, O mighty armed Arjuna, the tough enemy in the form of desire which is hard to conquer. Comment. Senses are superior to the body or objects of senses. It means that the senses know the object but objects don't know senses. Senses live without objects, but without senses the existence of objects is not proved. Objects can't illumine senses, but senses illumine objects. Senses remain the same while objects go on changing. Objects come within the range of senses, while senses don't come within the range of objects. Eyes, senses, can perceive the physical body and objects, but the body and objects can't perceive the senses. So, senses are greater, more powerful, more subtle, and have a wide range of activity than the objects and the physical body. Senses don't know the mind, while the mind knows all the senses. Every sense knows only its own objects, but does not know the objects of other senses. Ears can perceive only sound, but can't perceive touch, form, taste, and smell. Similarly, tongue can only taste, nose can only smell, eyes can only see, and skin can only touch. But the mind knows the five senses and their objects. Therefore, the mind is superior to, more powerful, more subtle, has a wider range of activity than senses, and is their illuminator. The mind does not know the intellect, but the intellect knows the mind and senses. The intellect knows whether the mind is quiet or turbulent, and whether senses function properly or not. It means that the intellect knows the mind and its thoughts as well the senses and their objects. Therefore, the intellect is greater, more powerful, more subtle, and has a wider range of activity than the mind and is its eliminator. The master of intellect is ego. Therefore, a person says, my intellect. Intellect is an instrument and ego is the doer. The instrument depends on the doer. Desire resides in the insentient portion of ego, but it is because of the identification of the self with the insentient body, etc., that desire seems to reside in the pure self, the sentient. Desire resides in ego, I, because ego has the desire to enjoy pleasures and so becomes the enjoyer. The enjoyer, enjoyment, and the object to be enjoyed belong to the same class. Otherwise, the enjoyer can't be attracted towards the objects. A vital fact: the physical, gross body is the object of senses. Senses are the external instruments, while mind and intellect are the internal instruments. The self is sentient, unaltered, uniform, and an embodiment of truth consciousness and bliss consolidated. But when it identifies itself with the insentient body, etc., ego is born and the self becomes the doer or agent. Thus, the doer agent has two aspects, the insentient one and the sentient one. A man, the embodied soul, because of the insentient aspect, is attracted towards the world. That is, the worldly desires are born, while because of the sentient aspect, he is attracted towards God or the spiritual discipline. As the insentient aspect is perishable, so are the worldly desires. And as the sentient aspect is eternal, so are the spiritual desires, needs. The mundane desires are renounced, while the spiritual ones are satisfied. The mundane desires can appear but can't exist, while the spiritual desires can be suppressed but can't perish, because the former are unreal while the latter are real. Therefore, a striver should neither hope for the fulfillment of the mundane desires nor lose heart by thinking of the unfulfillment of the spiritual desires. This desire can be easily slain through the discipline of action, because a striver following the discipline of action performs every major or minor action for the good of others rather than to satiate his own desire. All his actions are performed for the welfare of others without any selfish motive. All the resources are not his own but have been acquired and are likely to be lost. So he uses them for the welfare of the world by regarding them as the world's without any selfish motive. Thus, he gets rid of the desires easily and consequently attains his aim of God realization. Then nothing remains to be done, to be known, and to be acquired for him. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Sri Partha Sarthi, Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani, Srimad Bhagavad-Gita, Sri Hari Arpanamastu.